Loneliness. It's a word that cuts deeper than most people will ever admit. A word that feels like chains around your chest, like a silence so loud it drowns out every thought in your head. People think loneliness is just being alone in a room, but it's more than that. It's walking into a crowded place and still feeling invisible. It's sitting in your own house and hearing your heartbeat echo, because no one else is there to notice it. It's waiting for a call, a text, a voice, and realizing no one is coming. This is where his story begins. Not with victory, not with applause, not with light, but with a darkness so heavy it almost swallowed him whole. He was not always this way. Once, he had people around him. Friends who promised they'd always be there. A woman who swore she'd never leave. A family who said they understood him. But one by one, life took them away. Some left by choice, some drifted slowly, and some were never really there to begin with. And the cruelest part, when he needed them most, when he was at his weakest, no one showed up. He looked around and realized he was standing in a world that didn't even notice he existed. At first, the loneliness was unbearable. Nights stretched on forever. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, the silence pressing against him like a weight he couldn't move. He replayed every conversation, every betrayal, every goodbye. He thought maybe he wasn't enough. Maybe he was unworthy. Maybe life was punishing him. There were moments he wanted to give up. Because when you feel that empty, that forgotten, you start to believe maybe you don't matter. Maybe you were never meant to matter. But here's the truth people don't tell you: loneliness has two paths. One destroys you, the other remakes you. And he hadn't discovered it yet, but the very silence he hated would become the weapon that built him. But in the beginning, it felt like torture. He'd walk alone in the streets at night, watching people laugh with their friends, couples holding hands, families in cars. And he wondered, why not me? Why does my life look like this? That question echoed louder than anything else. Why me? He stopped talking about his pain because he learned something painful. Nobody really wanted to hear it. When he spoke about how lonely he was, people brushed it off. Stay strong. You'll be fine. Everyone goes through it. But when the night fell and the silence came, no one else was in that room but him. So he did what many men do: he hid it. He put on a mask during the day, nodding, smiling, pretending everything was okay. But behind that mask was a man drowning in emptiness. And that mask was heavy, because carrying loneliness while acting like you're fine, that's one of the hardest battles a man can fight. Loneliness became his shadow. It followed him everywhere, to work, to the grocery store, even when he sat with people. It whispered in his ear, "You're forgotten. You're nothing. No one cares." And when you hear that voice long enough, you start to believe it. But one night, as he sat in the dark with tears in his eyes, he felt something shift. He realized that no one was coming to save him. No text, no call, no hand reaching out. The world wasn't going to suddenly notice his pain. And in that moment, the truth hit him like a storm. If I don't fight for myself, no one will. It was the kind of realization that doesn't just appear. It forces itself on you when you've been stripped of everything else. For the first time, instead of drowning in his loneliness, he stared at it. He asked himself, what if this silence isn't here to destroy me? What if it's here to teach me? That question changed everything. He began to see loneliness differently. The silence that once felt unbearable started to become a mirror. In that silence, he saw who he truly was without the distractions, without the noise of other people. He saw his weaknesses, his flaws, his brokenness. But he also saw something else. A spark that was still alive, even after everything. And that spark whispered, "You are not done. This is not the end." But let me pause here, because you need to understand this: loneliness will break you if you let it. It will eat you alive if you believe its lies. But if you face it, if you sit in that silence long enough to hear the truth buried under the pain, you will find a version of yourself you didn't know existed. That's what he was about to learn. Still, it didn't happen overnight. He fought battles no one saw. Nights where tears soaked his pillow. Days where he wanted to vanish. Moments where his mind screamed at him to quit. But he refused. Because deep down, something inside him said, "This pain has a purpose. This silence is building me for something greater." And slowly, piece by piece, he began to rise. But rising from loneliness isn't glamorous. It doesn't come with music playing in the background. It comes in small, painful steps, waking up when you don't want to, taking care of yourself when no one notices, choosing discipline over self-destruction. And every time he did, the loneliness that once felt like a curse started to feel like training. Like the world had stripped everything away, so he could finally meet the man he was meant to become. This was the beginning. The raw, brutal beginning of a transformation no one expected. He was still alone. He still felt the silence, but he wasn't running from it anymore. He was learning to use it, and soon, that loneliness would turn into the very power that would carry him to heights no one thought he'd reach. Loneliness didn't disappear overnight. It was still there, heavy, dark, unshakable. But something inside him had changed. He no longer looked at it as punishment. He began to see it as preparation. And that shift in perspective, it saved his life. Because when the world strips you of everything, when you're left with nothing but silence, you're faced with a question most people run from. What will you do with this emptiness? Will you let it bury you? Or will you use it to build something unbreakable? He chose the second, not because he wanted to, but because he had no other choice. At first, it started with the smallest decisions. Waking up early, even when the bed felt like a coffin. Cleaning the room, even though no one would see it. Eating right, exercising, reading, writing down thoughts. Little actions, small victories, but those victories mattered. Because in the stillness of his lonely world, those small wins gave him something bigger than comfort. They gave him momentum. See, loneliness is dangerous when you sit still. The silence eats you alive when you do nothing. But the moment you start moving, the moment you give your pain a purpose, everything begins to shift. He turned the silence into his training ground. While others drowned in noise, in distraction, in shallow conversations, he was alone with his thoughts, alone with his demons. And instead of running, he fought them. He confronted the voices that told him he was nothing, that he was forgotten, that he was unworthy. And every time he refused to give in, he grew stronger. There were nights when the weight of it nearly broke him. Nights where tears blurred his vision as he did push-ups on the floor, whispering to himself, keep going, and though no one clapped, no one saw, no one noticed, those moments forged him. Because strength built in silence is the kind that cannot be broken. He stopped seeking validation from people who never cared. He stopped waiting for texts, stopped chasing attention, stopped begging for someone to see his worth. Instead, he started pouring that energy back into himself, into his body, into his mind, into his spirit. And here's what's powerful when you do that. When you take all the love you wanted from the world and give it to yourself, you stop being needy. You stop being weak. You stop being desperate for someone to fill the void. Because you realize the void was never meant to be filled by them. It was meant to be filled by you. The loneliness that once tormented him became fuel. He would wake up before the sun and whisper, "No one believes in you." But that's the point. Prove yourself to yourself. He trained his body like a warrior. He trained his mind like a soldier in battle. He trained his spirit like a man preparing for war. And slowly, his loneliness began to look less like a prison and more like freedom. Think about it when you're alone. No one can distract you. No one can lie to you. No one can pull you off your path. Loneliness gave him time. Time to build, time to reflect, time to plan. The same silence that once suffocated him now gave him clarity. For the first time in his life, he could hear his own voice without interruption, and that voice was telling him who he was meant to be. He began journaling his thoughts, writing down his pain, turning every wound into words, every scar into lessons. He studied books, absorbed wisdom, learned the patterns of great men who came before him. He realized something important. Many of history's strongest men were forged in isolation. Greatness is rarely born in crowds. It is born in silence. The man who was once broken began to rebuild himself, brick by brick. But let me be real with you. It wasn't easy. Growth never is. There were days when the weight of it crushed him, when he questioned if all this effort was pointless. He fought laziness. He fought doubt. He fought that whisper that said, "You'll never be more than this." And sometimes he lost. Sometimes he fell back into old habits, into old thoughts. But every time, he stood back up, because he knew if I quit, I go back to being the man who begged for people to stay. And I refused to be that man again. The loneliness gave him a gift. It removed the safety net. There was no one to lean on, no one to run to. It was either build himself or be destroyed by himself. And in that brutal clarity, he discovered something life-changing. True strength is built when you realize no one is coming to save you. And that's when his transformation really began. He stopped resenting his solitude and started respecting it. He saw it as a furnace, burning away his weakness, his neediness, his illusions. It was painful, yes, but pain is a sculptor, and it was shaping him into someone he could finally be proud of. The same man who once begged for company now walked alone with his head high. The same man who once cried into the silence now found peace in it. The same man who thought loneliness would end him was now using it to become unstoppable. But here's the lesson. Loneliness never truly disappears. It doesn't go away. What changes is what you do with it. You can let it break you, or you can let it build you. And he chose to let it build him. That's the turning point. That's the moment his story shifted from pain to power. Because once you stop running from loneliness, and you learn to sit with it, to grow in it, to transform in it, you become the kind of man the world cannot control. The silence that once made him weak was now making him dangerous. And soon, that danger would turn into power so strong, it would change his entire life. There comes a moment in every man's life when he looks back and realizes the very thing he thought would break him was the thing that built him. And for this man, that moment finally came. He remembered the nights of crying in silence, the days of feeling invisible, the crushing weight of being forgotten. But when he looked at himself now, the man who rose from those ashes, he saw something he never thought he'd see: strength. Not the kind of strength that comes from applause or recognition, but the kind that no one can take away. The kind that is forged in silence, carved out by discipline and sharpened by pain. The loneliness that once felt like chains around his chest had become wings on his back. He began to move differently, speak differently, carry himself differently, not because people finally noticed him, but because he no longer needed them to. That's what true transformation looks like. When you no longer crave validation, when you no longer chase love that doesn't respect you, when you no longer beg the world to see you, you are free. And freedom is power. He realized something most people never understand. Loneliness is not a curse. It's an invitation to meet yourself, to build yourself, to discover what you are capable of when no one is clapping, when no one is watching, when no one even cares. That's where true character is born. That's where greatness begins. He became disciplined in ways he never thought possible. His body grew strong, his mind sharp, his spirit unshakable. He built habits that turned him into a weapon. He read, he studied, he worked, he created. He took every ounce of pain and turned it into progress. Every hour of silence became an investment into his future self. And slowly, the world began to notice, not because he begged them to, not because he cried for attention, but because power cannot be hidden. You can try to bury it, but when a man transforms himself in silence, the results eventually speak so loudly, the world has no choice but to listen. The same people who ignored him began to ask, "What happened to you? How did you change?" And he smiled, because they would never understand. They would never know the nights of loneliness, the battles fought in the dark, the tears wiped away with no one watching. They would never understand that his power was not gifted to him. It was earned in solitude. And here's the truth: when you learn to master loneliness, you become unstoppable, because most people fear being alone. They run from silence. They drown themselves in distractions, in noise, in meaningless company just to avoid facing themselves. But if you can sit in that silence and use it, if you can walk alone and still build, if you can take the emptiness and turn it into strength, then nothing can scare you anymore. That's what made him dangerous. He no longer needed people to believe in him. He believed in himself. He no longer needed constant company. He found peace in his own presence. He no longer feared nights alone, because those nights had become the forge where his greatness was born. And he realized loneliness was never his enemy. It was his greatest teacher. Listen to me. If you feel alone right now, if you feel forgotten, invisible, unwanted, you need to hear this: your loneliness is not the end of your story. It is the beginning. It is the ground where you plant your roots. It is the silence where you learn who you really are. Do not run from it. Do not drown it with distractions. Do not waste it. Because hidden inside your loneliness is the version of you that you have always been searching for. He turned his loneliness into power. And you can too. But understand, it requires sacrifice. It requires facing the pain instead of escaping it. It requires sitting in the silence long enough to hear the truth about yourself. It requires discipline when giving up feels easier. But if you stay with it, if you endure, if you choose to build instead of break, then one day, you will look back and realize that your loneliness was never a prison. It was a furnace. And it burned away everything weak, everything fake, everything unnecessary, until only the strongest version of you remained. And when that day comes, you will thank the very silence you once hated. This man who once begged for love that never came, who cried for friends who never showed up, who sat in rooms feeling invisible. He became a force no one could ignore. Not because he found the right crowd, not because he finally got the attention he craved, but because he learned the most powerful truth a man can learn. I do not need anyone to complete me. I complete myself. That truth is liberation. That truth is strength. That truth is power. And once you own it, once you truly believe it, you will never walk the same again. You will no longer chase what runs from you. You will no longer beg for scraps of attention. You will no longer be afraid of silence, because silence will have become your greatest ally. So remember his story the next time you feel like you're breaking. Remember his pain the next time you think you're alone. And remember his victory the next time the silence gets too heavy. Because inside that silence is the seed of greatness. Inside that silence is the man or woman you were always meant to become. The man who turned his loneliness into power was not special. He was not chosen. He was simply willing to endure, willing to fight, willing to believe that the pain had a purpose. And because of that, his loneliness became the very reason he rose. If you're listening to this right now, maybe that's where you are. Maybe you feel invisible, forgotten, unseen. But I promise you, this silence can build you. This loneliness can transform you. This pain can shape you. The choice is yours. Let it break you or let it make you unstoppable.